How are we doing, everyone? So if you already haven't seen it on the channel, this is our new Highline 600 community aquarium that we have been scaping and adding fish to over the last few months. Now in this video I want to talk about one of the really small inhabitants that's in here, none of the ones that you can pretty much see swimming. It's one of the smaller ones that will be hidden amongst the rocks and wood. Now, when customers would come into the shop looking for an algae eater that stayed small and wouldn't end up destroying or wrecking your aquarium, well, the choices are quite limited, to be honest. Common plecos, well, they're great when they're tiny or they look great, and then they grow into, well, essentially a log that just destroys anything in its path. Things like sucking loaches or Chinese algae eaters, depending on what you want to call them. Again, great when they're tiny, look brilliant, look hardworking, but eventually they are going to grow up, they get a bit bossy and a bit territorial, and sometimes they can even start sucking on the side of your fish. So you were quite limited when it came to tiny algae eaters. But the Otocinclus, this tiny little algae eater that we've got in here, is different. They are peaceful, they are chilled out, they are fairly hardworking, but there are quite a few things that you need to be aware of to, well, make you successful with keeping them, which consequently is what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, Otocinclus, or ottos as most people call them, are a small species of catfish. They come from South America, and you can essentially think of them like a tiny little pleco. They've got the same sort of sucker mouth, the same sort of armor plating, but they only reach a few centimeters long. Now, aquarium shops will import Otocinclus under, well, sort of a umbrella name, as it were. Aphonis is often used in the hobby, to be honest with you, and it covers, well, quite a few species that actually look the same. There's Spiralis and Vitatus and, yeah, quite a few other ones that pretty much all look like the standard otto we see, and unless you're really high up in the fish keeping game, you'd probably never know the difference. Now, luckily most of their care is very similar, and they're all sort of similar to keep in what you need to do at home. There's also some more fancier varieties, to be honest with you. There's things like zebra ottos and also robocop ottos. Officially, robocop ottos aren't ottos, they're another species, but they do get called ottos. It gets a bit confusing, to be honest with you, and in here we've got giant ottos that again aren't officially an Otocinclus species, but they just look like a giant otto. But we're going to be covering the more common one in this, the Otocinclus aphonis or Vitatus or Spiralis, the one with the sort of brown top, black stripe, slightly white underbelly. We'll cover that one in this video, and we might do fancier species in other videos. Now here's where ottos really shine. They are constantly working, constantly grazing on those soft algae around the aquariums, and honestly I've lost count of how many times you see them all lined up along a nice little patch of algae, all grazing away and getting rid of it. They are just a brilliant little algae eater. And one thing to remember is they've got funny little quirks, I suppose you would call them. And that is like sometimes when you'd be bagging them up in the shop, you'd net them out, you'd put them into the bag, and one would go bloop, and you're like, oh no! And it would sort of sit on the surface for a second, and you're like, oh my word, what do I do? And then it would go, haha, and it would swim back off. And it's almost like a funny little stress reaction to being caught. It's, yeah, they sort of play dead for a minute. I do wonder if it's a wild thing, maybe when fish pick on them and they sort of play dead, the fish is like, oh, swims off, I don't know. But it is just a funny little thing to be aware of if you're ever moving or, you know, changing your ottos around. They can do it. Don't panic, just give them a bit of time and they should come round. And they're also expert hiders, so it was quite often that a customer would buy 4, 5, 6 Otocinclus, and the next day they'd be like, I can only find 2, I can only find 3. They are so small and so good at like getting on the undersides of leaves or getting in amongst the bogwood and rocks that they will vanish for, well, hours on end, only to reappear at the other end of the tank. There is a good group of them in here. And I'll be honest, I only ever see 2 or 3 at any one time. Once feeding time comes and we put some cucumber or some algae wafers in, we normally see a few more. But throughout the day, you're only seeing 1s and 2s at any given time. One important thing to go through before even stepping into the world of setting up for them and feeding them and hardscape and all of that is to discuss that some people do struggle with Otocinclus. And I think most of the time this is down to the feeding regime and not necessarily what you're doing at home, but what the shop has done before you and maybe the importer or the supplier before that. Not wanting to go into it too deep and too madness, but when they get shipped or when fish get shipped around the world or across the country, generally they won't be fed for a day or two before they're bagged up. And that is to make sure that they, well, don't go to the toilet in the bag and, cause an ammonia spike and cause a problem in that bag. You get what I mean? Now, once they have been shipped and they've arrived at their destination, that destination, probably your local fish shop, needs to get back on it with feeding and lots of biofilm and maybe some wood and some rocks in the tank, because the more things that ottos have got to graze off of, generally the fuller and the better their bellies will be. My success rate is fairly decent with ottos, and partly that is because I used to work in a shop. We used to quarantine the ottos, we used to feed them tons and tons of food. And yeah, they were really, really good, and they still are good to this day. This group of ottos came from my old shop. But it can be an issue for people out there. So I would say when you're looking at buying your ottos from your local store, ask them what they've been feeding them. Have a look how active they are. Ottos should be constantly busying around and grazing. If they're all sat and a bit sort of slow and a bit, I don't know, stuck in a corner and just really dopey, then it might be worth leaving them for a little bit longer to let the shop get them feeding. Have a chat with the shop and ask them maybe to usher a few onto the front glass. You'll soon see a nice fat plump Otocinclus. You can see their sort of silvery white shiny belly. And if it's a little bit sunken or it's a little bit skinny, have a chat with the guys and girls in the fish shop. All these people are there for the health and for the well-being of the fish. We all work in our hobby. We generally all love our hobby. Have a chat with them and say, oh, I think they're a little bit skinny at the moment. I can just see, not their rib cage, but their bones. Maybe I'll come back in a week or so once they've fed up a little bit. And maybe I was watching a video on Fish Shop Matt's channel and he said about putting more bogwood in there so there's more biofilm to feed off of, or some more rocks, or even go grab an algae covered ornament or rock from another tank in the shop, chuck it in with the ottos. Have a chat with them, have a chat with your local fish store, find out how long they've been in, and just really sort of scrutinize your Otocinclus when you're going to buy them, because I know people have problems with keeping them, but most of the time I think it is the supply chain up until the point you get them. Once you've got them and they're settled, they're as hardy as anything. I'll put some B-roll of some of my boys in the other tank in the garage because they are chunky, and I've had them for probably 3 or 4 years now, and they are good. Once you've got them settled, they're solid little fish. Now, if you're setting up an aquarium for Otocinclus, well, most of the time they're sort of an afterthought, I suppose. They're not an afterthought, but they're not normally the main focus of the aquarium, are they? They're normally there to help you out and do a bit of a job for you. And I'll be honest, that could be quite cool, actually, a stream aquarium for just Otocinclus, like bright lights and lots of algae. And anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Most of the time, they're not the focus of your aquarium, but making sure there's loads of big, smooth rocks and big bits of wood that biofilm will grow on, obviously relative to the size of your aquarium, will work an absolute treat, because those smooth surfaces mean they're just going to be able to graze all of the time. Then when you're looking at planting, things like Amazon swords, things like crypts, things like anubiases, with all those big flat leaves, the algae and the biofilms are just going to be growing all over them. And some of them will be microscopic, not even us to see, but the ottos will graze off of them, and that will give them a nice full belly and keep them healthy for longer. Now, one thing I would make sure is don't put them into a really new aquarium. Obviously, I let this tank establish for quite a few weeks and months, and I actually let the algae go crazy, knowing that I was going to be putting a group of ottos in here. And it has worked a treat. They are constantly grazing, constantly busy, and constantly got full bellies. But yeah, don't put them into a new aquarium. It's quite often that in a really clean aquarium, ottos can sort of starve and they will just diminish over the weeks and months that they're in there. So making sure you've got a nice mature aquarium with loads of spaces for them to feed is key for success. When it comes to building a community around or with Otocinclus in mind, it's really simple. Ottos are as peaceful as it comes. They are chilled out. So keeping them with small species like, well, we've got in here, we've got a load of different tetras. They don't bother the Otos don't bother them. We've also got some things like corydoras in here. Again, they won't really bother each other. Otos are actually a really good one for shrimp tanks because they're not interested in trying to predate on your baby shrimplets, or not that I've seen anyway. They will compete for the same food. You know, you want your shrimps and shrimplets to have a lot of algae, and the Otos will like the same thing, so that's a bad thing. But they are just a very chilled out fish that pretty much fits any smaller community aquarium. The thing you've got to bear in mind is you just don't want them to go in with things that are aggressive. So things like your larger cichlids, well, they're going to see Otos as lunch, and Otos, being a catfish, are quite spiky. So it could spell the end for your larger cichlid, and it could also spell the end for your Otto, because neither one's going to get on well when it swallows a very, very spiky, small, bony little thing. So yeah, keep them away from bigger fish that are going to cause problems. Keep them with community stuff, no problems at all. You will be absolutely fine. Now, as I've already said, Otocinclus is this like broad umbrella term for quite a few species. So when researching parameters and where they're from and where they live, you get quite a broad range, to be honest, because their distribution is pretty much all over South America and the Amazon. There's species from all over the place. So generally when looking at parameters and temperatures, I aim for the middle, but temperature-wise, you'll see numbers battered around 22 degrees Celsius up to 28 degrees Celsius. But again, I aim for the middle. 24 to 26 degrees Celsius should be absolutely brilliant. And then when it comes to pHs, again, you'll see a lot of numbers, but being from mostly Amazonian soft water areas, generally aim for 7 and below. So pHs of 6 to 7 should be perfect. Probably creep up to 7.5 if you need to, but they are going to prefer that acidic water. The main thing is keeping the water stable, keeping the water clean, keeping it well oxygenated. If you hit all of those, you should be absolutely brilliant. It's, well, way easier than chasing those exact numbers, because most of the time you really don't need to. All right, so here's a little bit of truth about feeding Otocinclus. They are not just there to clean your aquarium. To be fair, no fish should be really just there to clean your aquarium. We call them cleanup crew fairly often, but giving them their own food is going to be key to their long-term success and letting them thrive. They will eat soft algae. They will go around and sort of clean off any soft algae in your aquarium. But as soon as all of that's gone, and all that's left is maybe some of the more stubborn or tougher algae or even hair algae, well, they're not going to eat that. They are going to slowly starve. So feeding them things like algae wafers and making sure sinking catfish pellets get to the bottom are going to be the main staple foods that you can give them. Then once in a while, as a treat, maybe once a week, getting a bit of cucumber or lightly blanched courgette or maybe lightly blanched spinach, and getting that in there and sinking it to the bottom so that they can grab onto it and actually feed off of it will keep them healthier for longer. It's all about giving them a mixture of foods. Yes, they're going to clean some of the algae in your tank, but you need to make sure they're getting other things as well. Now, even though Otos are a small fish and they seem to be perfect for those smaller aquascapes and aquariums, what you've got to think of is that Otos are actually a sociable fish. They like grouping together. They like other fish of their own kind in the aquarium. And I've not seen it that often, but I've heard of it where people have put maybe 1 or 2 Otos into a smaller aquarium and they'll go and hide behind the filter and slowly fade away. It's not all of them, and sometimes it works, but generally having a group of 5 or 6 or more in your aquarium does way better. So you do have to weigh up the pros and cons. Most of the time I would recommend, if you've got a smaller aquarium, have a look at shrimp, to be honest. They don't always do the same job as Otos, but it's better to think of the animal's welfare rather than just, I need an algae cleaner. It'd be better for you to get in there with a magnet or a scraper or something like that and get rid of the algae yourself, because there's no point in putting Otos in there if they're just going to slowly fade away. So the more, the merrier. I cannot honestly remember how many I put in here. I think there was 6 or 8, maybe more. I can't really remember. And it wasn't even that long ago. Got too many fish in the house now. It's like a little mini aquarium. I suppose it is pretty much, isn't it? Anyway. But yeah, the more the merrier. Groups of 5, 6 or more is going to be perfect. Groups of 3 I've seen work quite often, but yeah, as always, more fish the merrier. And you know, that's not a bad thing. More fish, it's great. When it comes to breeding and sexing ottos, to be honest, it can be quite tricky. Females tend to be a little bit more rounder and plumper, and males tend to be a little bit slimmer, but it is going to be quite tricky to tell. And to be honest, they don't breed all that often in captivity. I have seen captive bred specimens. We have had a few customers in the past that have been able to breed them, but it's very far and few between, and it's quite rare situations. So if you do get them spawning, you know you're doing something quite well with your Otocinclus. But normally they'll go around and they'll stick their eggs to plants and bits of rock and wood, wherever they can lay them. A little bit like a corydoras, I suppose, in some ways. And then once they hatch, the young will feed off of biofilm. So if you've got larger aquariums with lots of surface area and lots of biofilm, you might find the babies get on absolutely fine. But if you are looking at raising them and breeding them, it's not going to be the easiest thing. The majority of Otocinclus do come from sort of wild caught and wild collected areas, to be honest with you. And I know that there'll be a whole thing of like, oh, wild caught, I don't like wild caught. It's a hard one, and it is a video I do want to make at some point, the pros of wild caught versus tank bred or tank raised, captive bred, whatever you want to call it. I do want to make that video because without us sustainably taking aquarium fish from the wild, well, that river then doesn't really have a worth for what's living in it. The only worth that river has is for drinking water and farming or agricultural purposes. So the amount of rivers that get diverted or dammed and then the species just disappears is quite big. It happens quite a lot. So having a price on the river where they can sustainably harvest, 100 ottos out and keep the main group breeding in there is actually way better in some ways for the environment or in the area than it is just diverting it for food. But it is a hard decision, it is a hard one, it is something you've got to think about and what you want to do, but I don't think it's as clear cut as wild caught is bad, because most of these fish as well are bottom of the food chain. Like tetras aren't high up the food chain, everything is going to try and eat a tetra, so it's not like plain sailing out there in the rivers. It's not going to be like all sunshine and people throwing pellets and flaking on top of them. There are a lot of predators in the Amazon. There are a lot of things that are looking at eating them, and that's not even talking about the seasonal changes in water where it will flood and then it will drain and fish get left in puddles all over the place. But anyway, like I say, it is a video I'm scripting. It's something I've got to work on. It's just something you've got to make up your mind to what you're happy with, really. So there we go, the Otocinclus, or dwarf suckermouth catfish. I might not have said that in the entire video. That's what we used to sell them under in the shop, dwarf suckermouth catfish. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been interesting. Let me know what other species you do want to see. Ideally, they're ones that I've got at home, so filming is easier. But I'm always up for, telling me what species you'd like to see, because I can always go and buy some extra fish. But Otocinclus, small, peaceful, generally easy to keep as long as you've got a mature aquarium. But other than that, you should be solid. And, as always, I'll see you all in the next one.